I'm endlessly fascinated and curious about the world around us, about business, about politics, about the arts, about culture, developments, social issues, and the people. Most importantly, about the people that are shaping our future. Every night, I get the opportunity to have conversations, to dive into conversations with thought leaders, with change makers, entrepreneurs, politicians, and everyday heroes who unpack the ideas and stories that I think matter to all of us. What's the future of our economy? What's the future of our country? How do we build stronger communities? What can we learn from music, theater, sports, politics, the arts? How does policy shape our real lives? What does leadership look like, real leadership in today's environment? If it's interesting and relevant and topical and we're talking about it, you'll hear about it here at 6 o'clock on the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. I want to have real conversations, in-depth conversations. These are ideas we're sharing. This is the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. Thanks for joining me. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. I've got a really interesting gentleman to introduce you tonight, and frankly, a pretty provocative article that he's written and published on young men and sort of this current issue that's come up about why young men are tending to vote far more conservative than they were in the past. And there's been lots of commentary about this. Peter Copland is with us tonight. He is the deputy director of the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. And he's written an article about young men who believe in sexual difference and healthy masculinity being conservative as an act of defiance. Peter Copeland, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on, Brian.
So tell me, if you could, what's the argument that you're making in this article? Lots of people have talked about how young men are finding it far more difficult in today's world for a whole bunch of different reasons. Why are they turning to the conservative, and why is this an act of defiance?
Yeah, great question. So I think everyone's aware that masculinity itself even is a bit under attack, seen kind of inherently as toxic and negative. And that's something that has been, predominantly put forward by progressive or the liberal perspective, which sees, kind of equality, erasing of differences, that they're not really being beyond just, basic sex characteristics, significant differences between men and women, and that, men kind of just need to, I don't know, start acting differently or something like that, in today's kind of new day and age. And I think, on the contrary, we see that this is not, it's certainly not making men happier. It's not making women happier either. And that's something I get into a bit in the piece. And why is it, an act of defiance? Well, because the status quo is not one in which, masculinity is treated as, inherently kind of neutral, but one that's rejected outright, and so the status quo is this kind of liberal progressive status quo, and to kind of conserve that paradoxically is to be liberal and progressive, but to be conservative is to reject that and is an act of defiance.
So you say in the article that the current social order has given rise to anxiety, loneliness, and a civilization-threatening demographic crunch, the confluence of an aging population and declining birth rates. And then you go on to say young men are searching for their place in a world that regards them with suspicion, and that you've known what it's like to experience that yourself. Really? You've experienced that? You've seen that yourself personally?
Yeah, I think so. I think what's given rise to those sorts of things, it's this idea that everyone is an autonomous individual, and they can freely choose and kind of maximize their choices, and that's what will yield happiness and flourishing. But I think on the contrary, it makes people isolated, alone, anxious and depressed, and a lot of the data bear that out. There's an interesting study in its fifth year, just put out, the Global Flourishing Study, which notes that many of the countries that we would suspect to be at the top of happiness or standard of life indices are in fact not. It's places like Mexico, Indonesia, and the Philippines, and that's because they have things like stronger bonds, community ties, greater religiosity, these sorts of things. Whereas our society prioritizes individual autonomy. I think the progressive worldview has also kind of enshrined normlessness and
Hold it,
norm.
hold it, hold it, hold it. Normlessness. What's normlessness?
Yeah, well, the idea that that your kind of moral sphere is just completely unique to yourself. So moral values are somewhat relative and subjective, and you can kind of create your own life for yourself. And it's also rooted in the idea that traditional norms or norms that have arisen and developed over time are in fact the result of power structures and this sorts of thing, and they're inherently they repress people, and they put them into boxes, and they don't let themselves express their unique self. And so as a result, we see a lot of people kind of leaning into that mode, which also has another key feature, transgressiveness, being kind of opposed to the past. Everything that came in the past is wrong, and I just need to do me and live my own life. Um, and so I think in this this kind of cultural milieu and this worldview has produced a society in which people are not getting they're not coupling up, they're not getting married. There was a significant obviously period of divorce following the 1960s and 70s, and it's resulted in a lot of very unhappy children who are the offspring of that, who've had a lot of problems in their life as a result. And now people are not marrying at nearly the rates that they were previously. And you mentioned the point about demographic decline, kind of what are the larger social implications of this sort of thing. Marriage is the greatest predictor of fertility, kind of unsurprisingly. And so people are not getting married, they're not having children. And that has a whole bunch of negative effects, from an aging population, that it's living longer, and a smaller portion of the working population that has to support them. So it puts strain on all of our social services.
Are you
And
suggesting this leads to loneliness and mental health issues?
Yeah, definitely. That's another feature of it. I think it just fundamentally has wrong the a picture of human nature. That's something that the liberal progressive worldview, if not outright rejects, certainly thinks it's a much smaller concept, um, and doesn't have so many implications for what makes people happy in a richer sense. And so we definitely see, as a result of this very individualistic society, uh, higher rates of mental illness, isolation, anxiety, depressiveness, all of these sorts of things.
So what are
And
you
it's
saying,
not
that we should go
surprising.
back to like the 1950s where, women didn't work, they stayed home, they took care of the kids in the house, and that the man was, the master of the house? Is that what you're asking for?
No, I note in the article that this is never like this, going back or looking some idealized picture. There's never been such a time and a place. And I note how in fact, you look back to that time, men in particular were a little stoic, emotionally unavailable, not well attuned, and a lot I think has improved in that regard. and not just for men, but for women too. And so it's not a question of like going back to some particular configuration of sex roles, but is definitely about recognizing that, sexual difference and complementarity has implications for, a whole host of norms in society. And I think we need to rebalance that. Some of it's just happening organically as people realize, whoa, like this is not for me. We're kind of seeing the exhaustion, I think, of, this 60s ideals of expressiveness, of the me generation, of rejecting the past. They're really running out of steam, as we're seeing from political movements kind of around the world, rejecting these ideas, and oftentimes just carving out alternative lifestyles and communities themselves. And then I think, and there are definitely some negative manifestations of the reactions to the excesses of this ideology, like being attracted to influencers online, and there's a lot of kind of negative stuff out there. And pretty nasty undercurrents in political movements as well. But hopefully that gets a bit at what you're asking.
So in the last federal election, the one demographic that think surprised almost all the people was how strongly young males were voting for the Conservative Party and Pierre Poilievre. And it was different than in the prior elections, where young people had come out for the Liberal Party and for Justin Trudeau. Some people thought primarily because of his policy to decriminalize cannabis, marijuana. So is this issue that you're talking about the reason why you think young men tended toward the Conservative Party and Pierre Poilievre?
Yeah, it's a great question. And so actually, if you look a little deeper, Pierre Poilievre also got the highest proportion of females for a conservative federal leader than I think until Mulroney, or anyway, it was one of the highest all time, and a significant increase over the past many elections. And it isn't necessarily that young people are becoming more conservative overall. Certainly, many are, and many young men are. What we're seeing is greater polarization among demographics, younger demographics, and some of the voting conservative is just voting for like in many respects, like I alluded to this at the outset, the status quo is the liberal progressive worldview. And so, young people they vote for change, right? They're the younger generation. They want to see change. So seeing change is not seeing, more wokeness and individuality, and equality, and reject tradition. It's the opposite, which is paradoxically conservative.
This is fascinating. We're going to have an interesting conversation tonight with Peter Copeland, talking about young men and a tend toward conservative policies and positioning and voting, and what that all means, based on an article that he wrote about young men who believe in sexual difference and healthy masculinity. Being conservative is an act of defiance. We're going to take a break for some messages and be back in just 2 minutes. Stay with us, everyone. This will be a really interesting conversation tonight. Stay with us. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. I've got Peter Copeland with us tonight. He is a Deputy Director of Domestic Policy with the Macdonald-Laurier Institute, a think tank in Ottawa that really does provide some incredibly good analysis and write-ups about a bunch of different topics. Before that, he was Director of Policy and Stakeholder Relations at the Ontario Government. He was a Senior Policy and Stakeholder Relations Advisor. He was a policy research person. And before that, he was at the University of Guelph as a graduate teaching assistant in management organizational skills. And before that, he was a teacher. So he's had a great deal of different experiences. He's got a great educational background as well, where he has a Master of Arts from the University of Guelph in writing, teaching, and a bachelor's degree in philosophy from the University of Waterloo. He's written this really interesting article in the Toronto Star. Young men believe in sexual difference and healthy masculinity. Being conservative is an act of defiance. And it was a really interesting article because it really resonated with a bunch of issues that people have been talking about of late, and some progressive people have been talking about this as well. I actually, Peter, listened to a fascinating podcast with Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, who was talking about California statistics, but I think some of the statistics are comparable in Canada. He was talking about how the percentage of graduates of universities has gone from, two-thirds male, one-third female a generation ago to today, where the majority are female, and the suggestions are that it's going to be a vast majority in the future. The Me Too movement and a lot of the feminists within the Democratic Party talk about how females still aren't cracking the CEO roles, but in a lot of other roles they're doing extremely well. And that he says that he thinks the implication of that is that a lot of males feel disenfranchised, that they don't have a place in the world anymore. And he talks about them, and this is, maybe paraphrasing that sort of that negative stereotype, but he was quite upfront about it. They're living in their mother's basements and they're playing video games, and some of them are joining incel and they're getting into conspiracy theories and stuff like this. And it's because they don't feel like they've got a place in the world anymore. Part of it is that they're not graduating to the extent that they might have in the past as a percentage from bachelor's or master's programs, and that those that are going into the trades don't have as great jobs anymore because those good union jobs of the past are to a certain amount diminished.
Mm-hmm.
Scott Galloway, who is a professor in the East Coast and has got a famous podcast, also talks about this, and he talks about how people have lost the sense of what it is to be a man and be masculine. And these are progressive voices that are talking about this. What do you feel about that?
Yeah, so much to unpack there, Brian. I think, yeah, let's start with the question of what it is to be a man and what scripts there are out there. I mean, I think you can see it in sitcoms in particular. Like start with the dad figures. They're kind of portrayed as like incompetent and buffoonish and well, I mean, they're really just kind of an afterthought there, and mom is so busy and working and trying to, look after the whole family, and men, they have no cultural role models or scripts to follow. It's kind of these there's nothing related to like virtue or service or providing security and stability. All of these sorts of things are, yeah, like they're rooted in worldviews in which like it means something to be a man, and you have a place to follow. I think women are in many respects at now like the tail end of this kind of buoyed optimism and this idea that we can be like men, we can be, we're equal. And so there's a lot of kind of interest and enthusiasm that comes with pursuing all of these things. But in fact, when you look at some of the data around flourishing and happiness, which I cite in the piece, it's quite clear that well, first of all, religious and conservative people tend to be much happier overall. And since the 60s, women are today less happy than their mothers and grandmothers. And I think this has a lot to do, and men, tend to actually be happier, even though I agree with you that, unfortunately many of them are sitting in their basement playing video games
So
or
you're saying that the Me Too movement, that feminism, that the pill, that the sexual revolution, that all these trends that have given females a lot more rights, a lot more responsibility, a lot more opportunities are not making them happier?
Yeah, definitely. Because the kind of worldview and perspective behind this is the idea that we're basically the same, men and women. And to feminism is kind of premised on the idea of it wasn't always, but the most common forms of it, and certainly post 60s, is a grievance form, which sees women's happiness as rooted in basically being like a man, doing all of the same sorts of things. And I mean, I don't know if we want to do a big deep dive into biology and psychology, but the differences are so numerous, and they don't they don't make it such that, if you look at any given person or particular function or task, like a man couldn't do it or a woman couldn't do it, or be attracted and fulfilled by it. But in general, they have profound impacts. And so this social script in which women are told to pursue career and material success and these sorts of things, which by the way don't make men happy either, when that's how they conceive of what brings happiness. And maybe we can get into that later. But that's kind of the predominant script, and so I think there's a lot of resentment and not having met the expectations, that they've been sold kind of a false bill of goods.
The women have been sold a false bill of goods?
Yeah,
You
yeah.
say you say in your article, and let me quote, a couple of sentences. You say, although women may appear to be flourishing on paper, for example, with higher earnings and greater professional opportunities increasingly available, they report record levels of mental distress and lower life satisfaction than their mothers and their grandmothers experienced. Perhaps in part because progressive feminism encourages women to be more combative, more traditionally masculine. Really?
Yeah, yeah, certainly. And again, de-emphasizing femininity. This is a big thing. It is just do everything that men do, and your femininity doesn't have anything significant to contribute here. And so I think it's really no surprise that we see this.
Let's talk, if we could, about your own personal experience, because I found this interesting in your article, because you say that you came to understand this personally. You said that you were raised in a society that believes values are subjective and ultimate meaning unknowable. Unknowable. You turned into philosophy in search of wisdom and the good life. But what you found in academia was, please explain this, deconstructionism, cynicism, and formulaic power analyses masquerading as insight. Wow! You found deconstruction, cynicism, and formulaic power analyses masquerading as insight? Seriously?
Yeah, I think this is by now, we see it in every discipline, even the natural sciences. This deconstruction is the idea that you kind of trace the development of an idea or concepts sociologically through like the people who came up with them and some of the things that influenced them, to suggest that everything is kind of contingent and irrational ultimately, and put a group or identity lens onto that. And it kind of suggests, even though the explanations, like just by pointing to various features of a person or the development of an idea over time, certainly does not causally exhaust the explanation of a development of an idea. I mean, it certainly leaves out a lot of the, whether it's rationally persuasive and what have you. But this perspective, deconstructing all of our kind of moral frameworks, our even the epistemologies and knowledge frameworks we've built up as this kind of sociology of groups, of people and their interests and power, and how power influences all of that.
So
It
whose fault is this? Is this academia? Is this the left, progressivism? Is this feminism? Like, whose fault is this deconstructivism and this diminishment of men and male and masculinity?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't want to put the blame too squarely on on one group or sets of ideas because these things are very complicated and they have long tails. But if we're starting, if we want to start with the 1960s, I think it's a good place to start. The kind of typical or the original Marxist understanding of society was class based, and so Marxists wanted to take control of the means of production in society and kind of foment class antagonism so as to bring about greater equality between class groups. And when that became exhausted and was also kind of revealed to be inadequate framework for understanding and also bringing about social change, that Marxists turned to identity groups and social classes, and so they wanted to break down society that way. And viewed, instead of the most important force of cultural change being materiality, the means of production, economics, to be the world of ideas and culture. So it was a very kind of concerted effort among radicals to take control of those formative cultural institutions, and that started with the universities. And so we see in the 60s, and in really like the boomer generation and the subsequent generation, the enshrinement of these ideas of rejection of tradition, rejection of objectivity, positive valuation of transgression, and erasing boundaries as an idea of liberation. So you're going to keep liberating, individuals and groups from the oppressiveness of norms and all of these things that supposedly hold people down and away from expressing their unique self. But it's just, I think, fundamentally wrong that all of those things, in fact, are what make life worth living. When they're not overly stultifying and oppressive, as I think we all need balance, and there's a lot of truth to some of those critiques. Like, you don't want the stultifying, fixed norms that never change, very unforgiving, and all of that. But ultimately, people are like, we're relational beings. We form bonds with others. Our greatest means of fulfillment is, self-giving and love, and we form, communities and families to develop these virtues and live well. And all of that was kind of poo-pooed by, intellectuals and activists, really, who make up the professoriate. It's this, I guess, like 9-1 in many universities, left wing to conservative, and some really radical left wing. Um, and so there you have it.
So it's academia, it's universities. Started with Marxism, then it was the sexual revolution in the 60s, and then it was universities got taken over by the left wing.
Yeah, I mean that's my just so story. It's much more complicated than that, but if we don't have a whole time to go back into, well, I mean we could go back a little bit to romanticism and even the Enlightenment era, and its great emphasis on subjectivity and the person moving away from objectivity. These things do have long tails,
So
but
what are
that's
you
no
saying, that
problem.
we need to go back to more firm roles of male, female, masculine, feminine, make what? Divorce more difficult, keep people married, get rid of the sexual revolution, maybe get rid of the pill, etc.?
Some of those things for sure, but we need to like further refine and develop. It's not about going back. I think people did not have a sense, for much of history, really, like the an intellectual grasp of like why these things are fulfilling. And like I would suggest, really in the past century alone, we've had tremendous gains in education and literacy that was simply not available before. And so many ideas that were taken for granted were just kind of shoved down people's throats or just followed by rote unconsciously. Um, and that's not conducive to being taken up and really believed and lived out. well. So I think, like in the main, we need a recognition of, yeah, male female sexual difference and complementarity, and the attendant kind of divisions that come with that, but not overly rigid and fixed. I think you're already starting to see very strong resurgence in interest in religion and spirituality. Just last year, in France and in the United States, there was a 45% increase in baptisms in Catholic Church and more conservative denominations. So I think like a lot of these things will happen organically, and they it's not about ideas always move forward and change, and they become refined and reformed, and I don't think we need to throw any babies out with the bathwater, but I can't perfectly project what this will look like either.
We're going to take a break for some messages and come back in just 2 minutes. Our guest tonight is Peter Copeland. He is a deputy director of policy at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. And he's written a really interesting article about masculinity being in a challenging situation today. And he says young men who believe in sexual difference and healthy masculinity are becoming conservative, and being conservative is an act of defiance. Stay with us, everyone. Back in just 2 minutes. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. My guest tonight is Peter Copeland, and he's written an article about young men who believe in sexual difference and healthy masculinity are becoming conservative, and therefore being conservative for them is an act of defiance. I found it a really interesting article because I do think, Peter, that there is this incredible trend toward young men voting conservative because they seem to find some meaning in the Conservative Party, and maybe something, maybe a lot of what you're saying is true. But it's frankly something I've been hearing on the progressive side of the political spectrum as well. And let me just to give you a counterpoint, read a paragraph for you. And again, I mentioned Scott Galloway, who is a professor at New York University Stern School of Business, who's written about this, and he says the following: "Boys and men are in crisis. Rarely has a cohort fallen further and faster than young men living in Western democracies. Boys are less likely to graduate from high school or college than girls. 1 in 7 men reports having no friends, and men account for 3 of every 4 deaths of despair in America. Even worse, the lack of attention to these problems has created a vacuum filled by voices espousing misogyny, the demonization of others, and a toxic vision of masculinity. But this is not just a male issue. Women and children can't flourish if men aren't doing well. And as you know, from the spates of violence, there's nothing more dangerous than a lonely, broke young man." So he's suggesting that this trend toward not conservatism, but sort of extreme toxic masculinity, the sort of the guy that's in the basement playing video games and joining incel, is a real negative trend. So is the trend you're talking about the same trend that he's worried about, or is it an extreme version of that trend, or what?
Yeah, it's a great point. It's both, and I think it's the same for women because we're seeing declines in mental health and prospects, along various indicators for both men and women. I certainly think, yeah, in the absence of, you know, uh, strong fathers and present fathers, which we know is the number one predictor of incarceration and out of wedlock teenage pregnancy in women, incarceration in males and the latter in women.
Hold it,
Without
hold it,
healthy
hold it. You're saying that you think there's a proof that the lack of a father figure, a male role model in the house, leads to um, higher teenage pregnancies and more incarceration of men.
Yes, yeah, it's the number one predictor of both, and there has been a huge increase in single parent homes, or kind of not fully present fathers, and
And
the
is that because of making divorce easier? Is that
yeah.
because of this issue that you're talking about in regards to, male role models, female role models, male roles, female roles, or is it our society becomes sort of narcissistic, and it's all about me, and wanting to sort of our disposable society. Like, I'm trying to get to
Yeah,
what the root
what is the
cause is.
main
What's the
thing?
problem? What's the cause of this?
Yeah, well, I mean, if you want, I think it makes sense to trace a lot of these things back to the 60s onward. Like it really does.
It really sounds like you think the 60s, the sexual revolution, the pill, abortion, the
Well,
break
yeah, I
of
certainly
families,
do.
that's the problem.
Yes, those things, I mean, and more, but they're all, I guess, if you want to talk about the contours of the worldview, the concepts that make these sorts of things possible, is this idea that my happiness lies in uniqueness, following my own script, rejecting norms, being an individual, rejecting the past. That is a very that's kind of the undercurrent here. And what that does, it certainly led to declines in marriage. Yes, because you cited divorce, no fault divorce. That's made that much easier. Certainly the advent of the pill and these sorts of things, they've actually kind of um, commodified sex a little bit and taken the intimacy away from it, just made it more transactional and something you can just choose to do kind of here and there. Whereas in fact it's a really profound thing, and can seriously impact a person psychologically for kind of misusing sexuality, which is pretty rampant in our society. And so I think we just have, yeah, we have an adolescent culture that's me because its perspective is, I'm an autonomous individual and I choose, and I make my own choices and path in life. And values aren't that objective, they're subjective. And we see, really, as a result, I think, like the fraying of a lot of bonds because of this, because bonds are hard to sustain and maintain when that's your worldview, right? Like all of these things, obedience, loyalties, they don't really matter that much. They're just kind of whatever, you know.
So, as a counterpoint to the argument that you're making, and you may or may not agree with this, and
Mhm.
I don't have the statistics at hand. I apologize for the reference, but I listened to a podcast as well that said that it's almost the opposite. That they used dating app statistics, and they proved, based on the dating app statistics, that 20% of the males got 80% of the female likes, and they were the 20% of the males that were the richest, that appeared to be the wealthiest, and that 20% of the females got 80% of the male likes, and they were the most beautiful. And so therefore males were attracted by beauty and females were attracted by money. And the answer of that is that there were a whole bunch of men that didn't get the dates they wanted and the relationships they wanted, um, and uh, and they found it very easy to get a lot of attention. But the 20% of the top found it very easy. But that it was actually sort of that old historical model that was the problem, where males wanted the beauty and females wanted the money.
Mhm. Yeah, that's really interesting. So I think that's very clearly rooted in biology, not as the deeper sense of what people are actually looking for, but certainly in a dating app setting or, first encounters, you're looking for signals and indicators, and males they look more so for physical attractiveness. There's evolutionary basis for this, rosy cheeks, all these sort of things, they indicate health. Males are tend to be more attracted by physical features, and females, because they bear the burden of childbearing, they need not wealth. Wealth is a proxy, it's an indicator in this case for success and the ability to provide security, because females are more vulnerable and they raise children. So there's a pretty solid, you know biological and psychological basis for that explanation. Certainly, if you're seeing, as I think we do, men's earning capacity and ability to signal their status as someone who can provide security, not like provide as in like pay for everything and that sort of thing, but provide security. Men also provide more emotional stability and security because men are more emotionally like even keel than women, again, who tend to care more for dependence and value that, and that's part of the natural male female complementarity that exists if people can kind of discover it and lean into it. But yeah, what you're suggesting is, I think we do see evidence of this, that men can't signal in the same ways, or they're not able to find success and be able to provide security through meaningful work because of this kind of um, lost lost place in the world, upended kind of social scripts.
I heard another
Seeing that.
review that said the problem was the feminization of elementary school and school generally. That roughhousing was gone, that activity was gone, that recesses were gone, that you had to sit still for an hour, that there weren't role models that were male in elementary school, teachers, etc. What do you think of that feminization of the school place?
Yeah, and I think we see that in in other cultural settings too. Certainly in the post-secondary, that's definitely a factor. I had someone on the podcast, Leonard Sachs, a well-known psychologist, who said just this, that again, no surprise, men and women, boys and girls develop differently. Boys need rough housing and play and don't have the same attention spans, and they learn differently. And so with a greater proportion of females in education and in higher education, the norms there being shaped by their perspectives, which emphasize inclusion, which emphasize safety, which also tend to police boundaries by kind of canceling and othering people who dissent from kind of the group perspective, because females find more safety in groups than males, whereas males compete in status hierarchies for their um, that's how they signal to other boys that they're competent in how they develop themselves. That it's not surprising that I think men and boys are not flourishing as much in school.
So you're a former political staffer. You now work for a think tank, and you're an expert on public policy, and that's what you do day in and day out, and communications. If you sat down with our Prime Minister Mark Carney or the leader of the official opposition who's just gotten reelected, Pierre Poilievre, what would you tell those two gentlemen in separate meetings what they should be doing given this issue that you see?
Great question. Well, if we're confining it to policy, I think looking at tax structure is certainly interesting. In Canada, again, kind of as a result of progressive feminism, we don't allow people to file income taxes as a family, and everyone is kind of treated as this individual unit, to kind of avoid oppression and this sort of thing. And this really incentivizes like everyone to be a dual work household, and this can contribute to disincentivizing family formation and making choices that many families deem are better for raising children and this sort of thing. It can raise marriage rates. Another one, I think we really have to look at childcare, like subsidizing childcare. It's created a huge supply issue, that people are, I think, well aware of. Again, it's further normalizing this idea that like everyone has to be working. And I think, relationships and family really suffers when you're basically trying to, do everything, you pay other people to manage the relationships in your lives, rather than do some of it yourself. So a good alternative there is to provide some flexibility allow a kind of subsidy for that parents can choose where to put their money, rather than require it to go to childcare. Um, those are a couple of ideas. I think, yeah, certainly it's not like politically feasible right now, but definitely looking at divorce laws and things of that nature would be beneficial. And I foresee that the political Overton window will shift further in the coming
So
years.
what, making divorce more difficult
Yeah,
or not
making divorce.
having no fault divorce or what?
Yeah, making divorce more difficult and getting rid of no fault divorce. I think while ensuring all the appropriate safeguards and not disincentivizing people who need to get out of, genuinely harmful and troubling relationships. But look, like marriage is supposed to be, like you give yourself to another person, for life, and the stability that provides for children is unparalleled. We know other things that I cite in the piece, that marriage is most conducive to happiness, by far across countries. Um, and so it makes perfect sense for the state to, within reason, promote institutions that promote human well-being. So that's another thing to focus on.
Yeah, the trite counterpoint to your argument, sir, is and it's very trite. I apologize for this bad joke, but lots of people say that, do you know why divorce is so expensive?
Tell me.
Because it's worth it.
There you go.
Anyway, we're going to take a break with that bad joke and come back with a couple of concluding comments in just 2 minutes. Stay with us, everyone. We're with Peter Copeland talking about males and the challenges that young men are running into in today's society. Stay with us, everyone. Back in 2 minutes. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. This is a really interesting topic, and I'm really enjoying the opportunity to chat with Peter Copeland about it. I do think there's an issue here, and I think that it's something that a lot of people on the left side of the spectrum, progressives, aren't willing to admit and aren't willing to accept. As I mentioned, I listened to a really interesting podcast with Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, where he talked about how he would raise it within Democratic circles, and a lot of the people within the Democratic Party thought he was crazy for talking about this, and they mentioned how many males were CEOs versus how few CEOs were female. Talked about the importance of the Me Too movement, etc., but didn't recognize some of these other trends in regards to the graduation levels of males versus females, and the number of men that are sort of out of work and out of promise and out of female relationships, and are living in basements, playing video games, being attracted by conspiracy theories, etc., and this toxic masculinity. And I think that that's real, and it's an issue not just for the conservative movement and some of these trends that Peter talks about in regards to them voting conservative as a act of defiance. We saw this, I think, to a certain extent in the trucker convoy, where people were talking about freedom and how critically important that was to them. And so, therefore, it's something that all of society's got to listen to and think about how we address it. Scott Galloway has put forward a couple of suggestions, and I think what they are is teaching men to be men, and teaching a positive form of masculinity, not going as far as Peter's been talking about in regards to making divorce more difficult, or moving back sort of the time clock and going back to the 1950s or prior to the sexual revolution. But he talks about men, frankly, taking responsibility for themselves, and the rest of us putting forward a more positive role model of masculinity. So here's a couple of suggestions. Get out of the house. Action absorbs anxiety. Take risks and be willing to feel like an imposter. Don't let rejection stop you. Try, and try again. Be kind. That's the secret to success in relationships. Find what you're good at. Follow your talent. Acknowledge your blessings and create opportunities for others. Be of surplus value to society. Being a good dad means being good to the mother of your children. Life isn't about what happens to you. It's about how you respond to it. And he argues that too many men sort of thought that they had this God-given right to a job, to be successful, to be the man of the house, and that maybe now we got to earn it. Peter, what do you say to all that?
Interesting. Yeah, well, I'd certainly agree with many of the things he proffered as advice. But I would question someone with his political leanings, I suppose, if I understand correctly. I'm not too familiar with him. Where do those things come from? Well, I mean, in our civilization, they come mostly from, the Greco-Judeo-Christian tradition. That I would say, like the cultural and political left has almost like full sail rejected 1960s onward. And their message to men, really, well, and to women too. We've already talked about this kind of like expressive me kind of generation. There's nothing compelling from the worldview, I guess, or in the culture, and certainly from someone from his vantage point, kind of offering that advice, that it even makes sense in. So I think in many respects the like the intellectual coherence and the moral and philosophical framework upon which some of those ideas are founded has been significantly undermined. And so, while I agree with many of those pieces of advice, I don't think anyone would just listen to them without a more coherent worldview, one that understands and recognizes natural sex differences and their many manifestations in social norms and the way we organize our society. And, the deeper philosophical roots that recognize objectivity, a higher power, kind of the religious perspective on the world, and some of these things that are part of our civilizational inheritance.
Interesting conversation, Peter. I really appreciate it. I think that this is a topic that's going to be important to policymakers. It's going to be important to politics because if you're right about this voting conservative is a vote of defiance, I think that that's a real risk for parties of the center and of the left. I don't think that that has to be. I think that there is a real role for people in the center and on the left, progressives, to be religious, to be moral. I don't think that the things that you talk about how critically important some of the Judeo-Christian ethics are, doesn't have to be only espoused by the right wing. In fact, I think that
Totally.
sometimes right wing religiosity does go to an extreme, such that you'll hear sometimes people say some Christians make it difficult to call myself Christian because of the beliefs that they espouse. I also think that that taking it to an extreme does lead to this potential toxic masculinity that is criticized, and the incel idea, and the in the basement playing on the video game idea. And I think that you know everyone needs to take some personal responsibility for themselves. And as Galloway and lots of people have talked about, it's getting up when you're falling down and fighting hard. And I think that's a role for men, and something that we need to make sure that men practice and realize and are proud of, and don't give up and live in their basements complaining about they can't get any dates, and they can't get married, and they can't have kids, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That said, the statistics that you've talked about, that Gavin Newsom's talked about, that Galloway's talked about, are concerning, and we need to think about that. So I really appreciate your article, and I appreciate you coming on today and talking to us about this. And I think this is going to be an issue going forward. I really appreciate it.
That's great. Thanks so much, Brian. I agree with much of what you said, and I just say that, every political tradition has something to offer, and we need a balance of things, and so maybe it's just a rebalancing is what's needed. And I'd certainly agree. I'd love to see more of those things on the left and center and all parts of the political spectrum.
That's our show for tonight, everybody. Thank you for joining. I remind you, I'm on every Monday through Friday at 6 o'clock on 960 AM. You can stream me online even from Ottawa at www.saga960am.ca. My podcasts and videos are on my website, briancrombie.com, on social media, on my YouTube channel, and on podcast servers as soon as the radio show goes to air. Thanks for joining us. Peter,
really interesting. Good night, everybody.